So we're really excited about this next panel. One of the things, kind of, as a student being involved in ecological economics and on the organizing committee that we were talking about was like, wow, there's all these really great ideas. Why aren't more people in the world kind of implementing them, and kind of like, how do we scale this up and like make this real? And so we got pretty excited to pair up with the Danella Meadows Institute to actually help organize this panel about how do we make social change go viral, and kind of talk a little bit about a much more interactive session than maybe what we're used to for this conference. So what we have here is Mike Cerrone, who works with the Danella Meadows Institute, who's been an important part of the organizing committee, and I'm going to let her introduce the panel.
Hi everybody, and thanks for being here. First of all, I would just like to say why at the Danella Meadows Institute we thought it would be important to help organize a panel with the stellar people who joined here today. And it was to get a better sense of where systemic change is going and where we can learn from actually people working in different areas outside of the academic environment, in business, in large-scale multi-stakeholder processes, and in government, and how actually this change is told, happens, who are the exemplars out there that we can learn from, how we build better networks and connections for making all our work more relevant. So I'm not going to tell anything anymore, and I will actually let Peter Senge here introduce himself and the panel, and I welcome you all again and enjoy this opportunity we have.
Thank you, Martha. Good afternoon, good morning, whatever time zone you come from. Hi. So I'm going to just say a word to introduce the group here. Three of the four of us know each other very well. We've worked together for a decade or longer. Cylvia is someone that I'm just getting to know now. So starting on my left, your right, is Darcy Winslow. Darcy and I worked together for years when she was at Nike, who was quite instrumental in getting Nike engaged in a whole range of sustainability issues. Then eventually became the head of the women's footwear division, and it's been about 4 or 5 years since she retired, right? And now works on projects of this sort all over. Hal Hamilton in the middle is the director of the Sustainable Food Laboratory, which is a very interesting network of about 50-50 NGOs and corporations who work together with the aim of making sustainable agriculture the mainstream system. It's a long-term undertaking. And on your right is Cylvia Hayes. Cylvia is the founder of 3E Strategies, an energy, environment, economy consulting company, and the First Lady of Oregon. It's a state a long ways that way. But it's kind of your sister state, and I'm sure as many of you realize who are here from Vermont. My name is Peter Senge. I've been at MIT for a very long time and involved in all kinds of different systemic change activities. So we just say a few words about the way we plan this out. In just a minute, we'll pass the mic around because I give each of the three to just introduce themselves a little so you get a little sense of their voice and their work. Then we have a couple of questions we thought would be a good way to kind of get us all going. Pose a couple of very, very basic questions and invite each of the panel members to respond to those questions in the context of their own work. Then we'll give you guys a little chance to talk together, kind of, well, what are you hearing? What are the issues that you think are really being not explored or that need to be explored further? Then we'll just open it up for a conversation for all of us. That's the plan, okay? So let me start off, if I could, with Cylvia. Excuse me, I was going to pose the question to make this a little easier, just to check it. So this is just a very short first cycle of just getting to know a little bit about each person. And one simple question that I'm going to ask each of you just to consider, what's the question for you in your work? What would you say if you could kind of look back over the course of your work? What's been the kind of core question or issue you've been exploring?
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. I think I'm one of the relatively lucky people who sort of found my calling fairly early in life. By the time I was in my early 20s, I knew that I was committed to leaning in to the best of my ability to helping make the transformation to an economy that improved prosperity for people while being environmentally restorative. And I've actually ridden a lot of vehicles to do that work. I founded 3E Strategies as a not-for-profit advocacy organization 15 or 16 years ago. We kind of morphed into a consulting firm over the last 5 or 6 years, and then 2 years ago I found myself in the admittedly bizarre role of First Lady as well, so have had to morph again to address all of that. But I think one of the things that's most exciting about where I'm at with this right now is I'm kind of working on the edges of all of those worlds. I'm First Lady, but not elected, not even state employed, not even paid, doggone it. And you know, I'm also consulting, but I've had to shift that around because I was doing a lot of consulting for state government and private energy and development companies. So it was really tough the first year, I will say, but now I'm pretty excited because I think that again, I'm working, one of my biggest chunks of professional work is with the national organization Demos on this whole going beyond GDP project, which I will talk more about because I really do think that one of the root causes of so many of our environmental and social ills right now are that we're measuring the wrong things, as most all of you know, and we're externalizing so many of those costs. And I think that these triple bottom line beyond GDP metrics are an opportunity to actually begin to get at some of that. And there's a momentum around it now in the United States and globally that I certainly have not experienced before in the 15 or 20 years working on this.
Hi, I'm Hal Hamilton, and I'm glad to be here. And I think 40 years ago, I was supposed to be writing a dissertation and took a dive and became a dairy farmer in Kentucky. And since then, the driving question for me is something about healthy farms and healthy places and people who raised food. And now Cylvia said she found herself walking through this bizarre opening into being First Lady. I found myself walking through this bizarre opening into being a corporate kind of community organizer in the corporate part of the food system. After having been a community organizer in rural Kentucky and kind of having a left-green analysis of the world, and when Peter once asked me about 12 or 14 years ago, after I had inherited being director of the Sustainability Institute that Danella Meadows founded, and Dana hired some young staff to model forestry, agriculture, and fishing systems, and we came up with some hypotheses about why those systems so consistently overshoot, and why they so consistently drive the people doing the farming and the fishing and the logging into a socially bad situation. Why that happens. And so we developed some fairly sophisticated system dynamics models of that, and Peter came and we asked him, what should we do next? And he said, well, how are you engaging the people who make all the most important decisions in the system? And I said, well, that's the problem. Those corporations, they cause all the problems. And he said, yeah. And how are you engaging the people who make the most important decisions in the system? And I said, well, they're the problem. And he said, yeah, and how are you engaging them? And so that was actually the beginning of a journey for me that is somewhat bizarre, but incredibly inspiring. So that's where I am, right in the sort of guts of the mainstream food system, as well as at home making, yuppie upscale cheese and stuff.
Hi, I'm Darcy, and I guess the question that I've lived with and how I've operated within Nike, 21 years there, was as a provocateur and always posing the question, what if, what's possible, and why are we doing things the way we do it today? And part of that has come from my long background of being an athlete. I'm not an economist, I'm not an academic. But I've always been a lifelong athlete, and one of my mantras was to try a new sport every year, to challenge myself both physically and mentally. How do you overcome the unknown? How do you overcome fear? How do you train for something? And that translated into my business life, my professional life, and continues today. So I guess I'm very comfortable and have become very comfortable in the unknown. And given what we're faced with today and how these systems operate or not, being able to ask those questions and to be that provocateur from, I wouldn't say an ignorant, but an innocent place, and really just trying to understand what is possible. My background, my training is as a biomechanist, kinesiologist, and exercise physiologist. So without having the words, I've always been a systems thinker because the body is one of the greatest systems on the face of the earth. And how to translate that into how we look at the world around us. And now within the Academy for Systemic Change, which Peter and Hal and I are all part of, applying that work to what we call critical domains, education, marine ecosystems, a little bit into the business realm and community development, and looking for those exemplar organizations or those Jedi Masters who have really begun to achieve a high level of success in these complex issues, and to better understand what their theory of change is and how they've applied what they've learned over the years so that we can go to scale. And that's kind of a tough term, but it's definitely a learning journey, and happy to be on it, and I'm okay with living in the unknown.
Thanks, Darcy. So I'll just kind of reflect on one thought, which is very present for me at the moment. It's a simple way to introduce myself. It's very nice to be here, hosted not only by the Society, but by the Denali Meadows Institute. Dana was a very good friend. And somebody who, amongst a kind of group of us, we really kind of held some very tough questions. We were both academics. That plight is one shared by many in the room, I believe. We could see all the, I would just call them personal challenges of being an academic. I mean, obviously being an academic is a lot of fun. Most of us who are in this room wouldn't be if we didn't think that. But it's not a very mature social environment. I'm trying to pick my words carefully. You could call it a kind of dog-eat-dog academic competition to the death, often, right? I remember as a young academic, I was advised very clearly, really not a good idea to co-author papers, right? Because on any tenure track, that usually doesn't work in your favor. So Dana also was an academic, and what we shared was this kind of conviction on the one hand that this is not an institution with no value whatsoever, but it's a one that's going to go through a long journey, I believe. And I'll speak now for myself, obviously. Going to go through a long journey of actually being productive. The common denominator underlying this panel will be the institutional reality. The reality of organizations, networks of organizations, industries, regions. Look, if any one of us were completely determined, we'd have a hell of a time wiping out a species. As individuals, we don't have that capacity. But collectively, mediated through the network of institutions that shape day-to-day life, we do a damn good job. So clearly, while individual leadership, individual development, the commitment, the insight of individuals is terribly important, the action's not there only. It really is about transforming the institutional milieu that shapes modern living. That's our common denominator, and I just want to add in one, hopefully polite and respectful nudge that includes us. Academia is one of the institutions. And you may remember that old saying, you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. Well, we're all both. So this is a passion that Dana and I both shared, that the academic world, just like the world of business, just like the world of government, just like all the key institutional worlds, too, is part of the problem. Otherwise, the problems would be moving much faster than they are. So hopefully that serves a simple function, which is to put all of us a bit in a reflective mode. What do the subjects we talk about up here have to do with me? What do they have to do with my organization? What do they have to do with how I do my work? As academics, we often suffer from, I would just say, an extreme objectification syndrome. We're always looking at the world out there and forgetting that there's someone looking. There is no world out there, independent of those looking at the world out there. And in my opinion, there's no stance of neutrality. It's a fiction. We all buy the same stuff, more or less. We all use the same energy, more or less. We all, more or less, are part of one big system. So our theme today is supposed to be systemic change, and what are we learning about scale? So let's get on with it. We work in different kind of institutional milieus. Darcy's had most of her experience in the corporate world. And networks of corporations collaborating. Hal has been in this very unusual situation for a decade of building really, I would say, one of the best examples in the world of a cross-sector collaboration. Today, the Food Lab is 60, 70 organizations, roughly 50-50, business and civil society, founded initially by Unilever and Oxfam. So that kind of set the tone. It's hard to find two more dissimilar organizations, culturally or in terms of mission, than a giant global food corporation, and at least in Europe, without doubt, the best-known social justice NGO dealing with the plight of rural poverty. Cylvia, as she said a little bit in her intro, has really worked at a lot of different levels, but particularly now has a very unusual opportunity to work across governments, state governments. So she'll talk a little bit about the status of this genuine progress indicator work, and the fact, which I didn't really know, that actually, you said today, almost 20 states are now involved, with 3 or 4 being real leaders. So I think we'll go in that order, because I think it's a little easier to kind of hold the ideas, starting from the individual institution, you might say, networks of cross-sector institutions, and then the public sector government institution world. As I said, we thought a simple way to organize this was to me to pose a question. So here's the simple little initial question. How do we internalize the externalities? How many of us have heard, well, that's a great idea, but we can't afford it, right? Alternative energy is a great idea, but it'll cripple the American economy. Where you could argue that the current energy system is, in fact, crippling the American economy. But somehow all the costs of it are distributed in so many different places, where there are employment costs, or climate destabilization costs, flooding, drought, crazy weather. It all lands in a different place and is, quote, externalized in our traditional economic jargon. So we thought we'd take that as the first kind of big thematic question. What are we learning about the process of internalizing externalities?
Small question. To tell this story, I'll have to start a little bit at the beginning. No, it's not really the beginning, but in 1997 is when we really started the work, or posing the question, do you know what's in your product? And again, Nike being the leader in the sports and fitness industry, there was a lot of responsibility that came with that, and we got hit with that question from the outside. So in some very early work, we realized that we had no idea what was in our product. I met Peter in 1998, and we started, Nike was one of the founding companies of the Sustainability Consortium out of the Society for Organizational Learning. And during that time, that early period, it's when we first stepped back and drew the Nike system for the first time. And it was at a fairly high level, but it gave us all the same picture of what we thought was within our control, what was within our sphere of influence, and where we had impact, both positive and negative. And over the years, as we went deeper and deeper into that, and to understand what our footprint is, and I'll just use petroleum and water as an example, we were able to triangulate and calculate just how much petroleum was in a typical pair of running shoes. And any guesses of what that might be? And you might think, oh, that's such an inconsequential number, but when you think of the billions of shoes, and if Nike's on the front end, but it was a starting point. Any guesses? A barrel. 3 gallons of petroleum are in every pair of shoes, if you take the entire life cycle. Now, when you think about that, where do you think most of that would come from? When we're manufacturing products in about 60 countries around the world, and materials are coming from everywhere. Transportation, right? You are wrong. 66% of all the petroleum comes from the material choices. And so that gave us the first clue as to where to begin to invest in advanced research and development and who to partner with. We needed to fundamentally redesign how we thought about product. And I'll give you just a couple of examples there. From the apparel, so we're all in this together. As I was saying, in the apparel world, and we're all part of this as well, a typical t-shirt, how much water do you think is embedded? And this is all about internalizing the externalities. How many gallons of water in a typical t-shirt? I hear 150, do I hear 100? 500? 700? In a simple t-shirt, 2,700 gallons in a pair of jeans. These are things we don't think about. And then when you add on to that, where most of the apparel in this industry is made, it's in water-constrained areas. So we're now drawing down from the water system that these populations have to to be able to survive. So it was a real conundrum, and once we began to internalize that, we stepped back and said, so what can Nike do? What can one company do? And the answer was, we couldn't. So one of the positive things that is happening is the formation of these coalitions where the entire industry and other partners are coming together to solve for these very complex issues and to pool their resources, their investment resources, and the brain power to solve for these complex issues at a pace much faster than any of us could do on our own. And the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is one. I'll give one more example and then I'll pass it on. We're in the 3rd year, we collectively, of a coalition called Launch 2020. And the 4 primary partners are Nike, NASA, USAID, and the US State Department. And those are unlikely bedfellows, but they all see and they all agree that we have to do things differently in the past. Just a month and a half ago, they all came together and invited about 150 thought leaders from around the world to the Nike headquarters to discuss materials and how we make stuff. And to look forward and to also bring in all the environmental ecological sciences to begin to set a challenge to these companies, to these organizations, to do things differently in the future. And some of the innovations that have come out just in the past 2 years, last year it was in the medical field. So these coalitions coming together to internalize what we must and to come up with a different path forward, to me that's very inspiring. But can we get there fast enough is still the question.
Thanks, Darcy. I was just thinking that working in these large institutions, especially in the market system, sometimes feels like swimming upstream against the financial drivers. But sometimes it feels like riding a wave when you're in the brand, reputation, and sort of manufacturing part of the system. So let me just tell you a quick story of General Mills. So General Mills bought sustainability expertise when they bought Muir Glen Organics and Cascadian Farms, 2 organic brands that they bought on the in, I don't know, 2002, 2003, something like that. And they bought the founder, they made him a VP of sustainability. He didn't know anything about sustainability. He started benchmarking General Mills against their competitors. We had, I remember, a meeting there in their boardroom, maybe 2004 or 5, and he said, here's what my calculation is of where our water footprint and greenhouse gas footprint are. And he kind of laid it out through the supply chain, starting with raw materials all the way through. And then he said, most of it's in agriculture, but we can't do anything about that. So let's talk about packaging. So that was the state of play, and just in one company with one guy, very smart, but the state of play less than 10 years ago. Then all of these companies start working on their own operations for kind of reputational purposes, as well as cost-saving eco-efficiency purposes. They start saving energy, they start saving water, it's a natural thing, it aligns with cost savings. And then they get pushed by shareholder activists, they get pushed by the Greenpeaces of the world, dressing up like butterflies and talking about GMOs and whatnot. And they start saying the future of our brand is dependent upon cleaning up our act and looking responsible. And then comes the 2008, 2009 world food, there's a global recession, but there are also food riots. There's not enough food around in a lot of places. So then, when commodity prices sort of tip from chronic overproduction and low prices to maybe chronic shortages and high prices, and they start worrying about supply. Where are we going to get the supply of all these ingredients? So now, the focus is on the sustainability of ingredients. So Unilever, Peter mentioned Unilever, has a commitment now to 100% sustainably sourced ingredients by 2020 and having their environmental footprint by 2020. The Mars company, which makes a lot of pet food, and they own Uncle Ben's rice, and they make a lot of crappy candy, but their commitment is an absolute reduction in their greenhouse gas emissions through the entire life cycle by 2040. No matter how much the business grows, an absolute reduction. They went to IPCC and picked the target to keep it under 2 degrees centigrade. If everybody did their share, they apportioned their share, and they've made that commitment. And they have a clear strategy that includes operational efficiencies, capital efficiencies, new technologies, and new sources of energy. It's a very sophisticated, engineer-designed process. They're having trouble now when they get to agriculture because it's turning out that biological systems are a lot harder to do this in than factories. But nonetheless, these sort of things give me more hope than I ever had as an activist.
So when you're one small person on a mission to transform the global capitalist model, it's sort of important to find your leverage points. And for those of you who don't know, John Kitzhaber is the once and current governor. So he was the 2-term governor of Oregon, turned out, I met him just after he turned out, first person to come back and run for a 3rd term. And he didn't really want to. I mean, he knew what he was looking at. And, but we had both reached a point where we don't think we're going to get, in a timely enough manner, solutions to the big issues of the day from the federal government. We think that one of the big leverage points are states as innovation labs and then multi-state regional collaborative efforts. And so around the internalization of costs and benefits and making the transition, there are a couple of things that are going on. We've now had the governors of California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia sign on to a joint resolution to accelerate clean economy development as our jobs growth strategy. And we have studies to support those clean economy sectors are where jobs are growing, they're paying better, they've been more recession resistant than conventional economic sectors in the West Coast, and also, by the way, some compelling studies in this area as well. The other piece of this really is this going beyond GDP. And I have to really credit Maryland. Again, I first learned about the GPI, Genuine Progress Indicator, back in grad school, but it had not really been applied anywhere in the United States. And a couple of years ago, realized that Maryland, through Governor O'Malley's office and the leadership of Sean McGuire, who's back here in the office, they developed the first Genuine Progress Indicator at state level. A year ago, the organization that I'm working with again on this project, Demos, convened GPI in the states. There were 4 of us: Maryland, Oregon, Vermont, and Utah. In just a few days, we convene again, and there will be 19 or 20 states there. Tremendous momentum around this. The Holy Grail, and this is what I would really offer up to an academic audience, we've got to be able to take these triple bottom line alternative metrics out of the academic and analytical world and apply them to policy and budget making decisions. And I'll give you one example of that. As part of this work, I was in Bhutan recently, and actually the governor came with me. And the day that we left, of course, there was a snarky attitude or article on the front page of the Oregonian about governor going off in search of happiness. And unfortunately, the happiness frame does get trivialized in the United States, despite the fact that, you know, it is in our founding documents. But nonetheless, rightly or wrongly, progress is an easier lead. But what Bhutan is doing is incredibly important because they actually are applying through the 9 domains of the genuine or the gross national happiness index. They're applying that to policy, budget, and infrastructure decisions. To give you an example, their tourism industry is really picking up, and they wanted to start doing scenic helicopter tours. But they ran the GNH lens and the calculus on that and determined that the downside of the noise pollution and the increased cost of the infrastructure and fuel necessary to operate the helicopters actually outweighed what they would likely generate from increased tourism revenue. And they banned helicopters, except for extreme emergency. They're putting similar limits on vehicles. Now, there's some applicability and some apples and oranges there, but it's a very important model. And I think that, that developing in mass these more comprehensive metrics provide an opportunity to begin to internalize the costs, full cost and benefit, full cost accounting. And with our work on GPI in the States, we are really intending to take this out of the academic and apply it to policy and budget decisions.
Thanks, Sylvia. It's okay, Sylvia. I want to stay for a minute with some of the examples you guys were talking about, and maybe go one cycle a little bit deeper. The general question that I think would be really useful to reflect on a bit is, as you look at the changes that you watched happening within companies, within these collaborations linking business and civil society, and in initiatives like the Genuine Progress Indicator, why do you think this is happening? How is it happening? What is enabling it? There's very few new ideas here, really. In fact, if you really step back, they're all ancient ideas. But as you said, you first started reading about GPI when you were a student. And, you know, the Gross National Happiness Index project started in Bhutan about 35 years ago. Yet, in different ways, all of you have also made note of something more is moving now. I'm just curious your thoughts as to why, and particularly what can we learn from that? I mean, if it's just that's happening and it's good luck or bad luck, that's one thing. But if there really are some conditions and some methodologies, I'll use those 2 broad categories, some circumstances that are developing and some approaches, some strategies that seem to be starting to help move things. It'd be really interesting to hear your comments.
I think it starts personally, and I'll just take it from my own vantage point. There were a few things that occurred in my life in 96, 97 both on the health front for my husband and myself. And it was at the same time when I was beginning to ask the question, there's got to be more to life than putting up the next cool running shoe. And at that time I was running advanced research and development for Nike. I read a book by Sandra Steingraber, Living Downstream, and it explained the cause of both my husband's and my health issues. And it was toxics and substances in the medical field that have since been banned that caused what we experienced. And so it was a wake-up call for me, and going back to the question, do you really know what's in your product? And the answer was no. And so as I started engaging internally different parts of Nike, I would just sit down with them literally one-on-one and talk to them about, what we were facing and what our role, our individual role was in that. So finding the heroes in the system, as I've come to call them heroes, and how to get them involved. So it really did start at a personal level. We did try to start at the top and to convince them that this was better business, and they weren't ready to hear it. The CFO wasn't ready to hear it. They just could not hear the language. And so we had to find different ways to get into the system. And then as we began to take it externally, when we set the long-term goals, the 2020 goals, we set them up in terms of what do you want to take to 100? What do you want to take to 0? And that forced us to ask very different questions around what we were doing and where we wanted to go. If we had said we want 50% less toxics in our product, it's not very inspiring. So it's how do we do, less bad. So posing these questions really engaged people at a different level and at a personal level. The same was true when we had to go into our supply chain. DuPont was our largest supplier. It took a year for the conversations to get deep enough to where we could agree on the same long-term goals, and it completely changed their investment strategy around their long-term R&D. So I think the process is, at least in my experience, is to start from the personal. And we flip the questions. This is actually from work Umberto Maturana did. Ask the question, what do you love and what do you want to conserve? Instead of, how do we become more sustainable? And go, what do you love? What do you want to conserve? And that was a very different way of engaging people in this work. The example that I used, the CEO of Nike right now, Mark Parker, at the time we started this, he was one of the critical linchpins in the company. And Peter's got a great graphic in the book, The Necessary Revolution, around how to create the demand or the pull for this work. And it goes from avoid it at all costs, let it happen, to I'll support it happening, to where I'm going to make it happen. In 1996, Mark was at, I'm going to let it happen. He gave me $1 million to go out and try a few things. He is now, this is all about his legacy. So it is a journey, and it's how you work and be patient and learn to speak in their terms, learn to be a translator in this work so that you can invite and engage all the different players and stakeholders into it. Oh, the 2020 goals that we set in, I set in 1999 were 0 waste, 0 toxics, 100% closed loop systems, and sustainable growth and consumption. And that one was so far ahead of its time. It wasn't about how do we sustain growth, but how do we grow sustainably? And how do we begin to look at consumption? That one has fallen off. I think it's something that they're starting to wrestle with again. And since then, they've added energy, water, and equitable manufacturing in that work. I'll say one more thing on the consumption. Nike is still a growth company. So while they are doing amazing things, they have transformed the, they are still a growth company. Last year, they grew from 20 billion to 24 billion. So, you have to ask yourself, they need to ask themselves, how do they start to wrestle with that? How do we, work with the Wall Streets of the world? Their comeback was, well, we are going to decouple growth with the increased use of renewable resources. great, but they're not going to get there quick enough. So I think, you know, it's still a paradox that they have to live with, and many companies do.
Yeah, it's important to share enthusiasm, but also to be humble, because this is a big mountain to climb. I was thinking just now of when we took a guy from Unilever as part of a trip to Brazil. We take a lot of people on field trips where we mix diverse people in a van and bounce around and visit farmers and packing plants and so forth, and get people to talk to each other about their assumptions and their values, and it makes a big difference. But I remember the guy who's in charge of, now his job is in charge of sustainable sourcing at Unilever, and he said in 2004 that small farmers weren't part of the way they thought about sustainability. They were after who produces their product then, and they assumed that that was pretty much big scale production. And a few years later, on a learning journey in Honduras, Senge really started to think together with development organizations, Catholic Relief Services, Oxfam, Center for Tropical Agriculture, really started to think about the degree to which small farmers actually do now and could more produce ingredients for like Knorr soup, which is one of their brands, in a way that was really good for those farmers. And now, fast forward till about a year ago or so, Unilever announced their commitment to improve the lives of 1 billion poor people in the world over the next several years. And at least half of those being small farmers in their supply chain. And one of my colleagues this week is in London facilitating a design session with people from Oxfam and various development organizations, as well as the supply chain people in Unilever, for how to measure the impact. So this isn't poof. This isn't a public relations, fluffy, nice story. They're getting into the weeds with the metrics. And on the ecological side, a couple months ago, the guy in charge of sustainable sourcing at General Mills said, look, we're taking these measurement tools out to where these farmers where I buy wheat and where I buy oats. But it turns out that those farmers grow a lot of other things in rotation. We're in the Snake River Valley in Idaho, they not only grow wheat, but they grow potatoes, and they grow sugar beets, and they grow barley, and they graze cattle. And they're all in a watershed. And if we're going to measure sustainability, it doesn't do me really any good in the end to just measure how well the wheat farmers are doing in their wheat fields. You have to look at the whole rotation. Well, I don't have any influence, and I don't have any relationship with the people who buy the sugar beets and who buy the barley. So could you help me find 15 or 20 food companies, overlay their sourcing geographies and their key commodities, and then figure out what motivates, what are the trusted advisors of those farmers for those different commodities in each of those regions? What are the ecological challenges in each of those regions? Where's their water stress? Where's their biodiversity impacts that we want to do something about? So by definition, going after a goal of sustainable sourcing means they have to start collaborating with other companies. Then they have to start collaborating with the farmers and the farm leaders and the trusted advisors and consultants to the farmers. And now they have to collaborate with the Nature Conservancy, which has 400 hydrologists on staff, to help them figure out the water challenges. They have to collaborate with WWF, which has another set of experts. So it's collaboration by necessity, and it's also using kind of tools that are represented in this room and your students and so forth by necessity in order to accomplish this very market-driven goal.
I do not in any way want to make light of the very real pain that is associated with the Great Recession. We have record numbers of people in poverty in the US, and had we actually adjusted the federal poverty level, it would be much, much worse than those statistics show. However, I think the opportunity in the Great Recession is that we can finally see that there are some flaws in the foundation of the status quo economic model. And more and more and more people and institutions are willing to start questioning whether or not it's time to evolve that model. as I mentioned, we've got states that are really moving. We've got the work that we've done in Bhutan and Brazil earlier this year, funded by the government of Germany. Number of countries who are really looking into the next model. And how many of you know of Charles Handy and the area of paradox? He's a business management guru, and this is, I think, very telling. So if you think about a company, they start out with a business model and a product, and they get investments, and they invest, and they grow their company, and they grow their business. And while this is happening, the context within which they exist, the environment that they exist in, is changing. Maybe public opinion changes, maybe there's a technological breakthrough. A successful company, when they see that start to happen, so if they don't respond to those changes, pretty soon they hit the classic point of diminishing returns. GM is a great example of a company who did not respond to changing consumer demand, continued to build big gas-guzzling SUVs when people were increasingly concerned about the price of gas. A successful company, when they reach that point where they realize that their old business model isn't working so well anymore, they create a new model, a new product, a new way of doing things. The challenge is that for a period of time, the two curves, the two business models have to coexist until the new model can really gain traction. And that period where both systems are in existence is called the area of paradox. There's a lot of upheaval, it's unsettled, people sense that the old way's not working so well, can't completely see exactly what the new way looks like. I believe that's where we are. That's where we are as a culture, that's where we are in so many of our big systems, healthcare, energy, and just the general evolution of the economy. And the one piece that I always want to stress this, the economy is not the Atlantic Ocean or the Rocky Mountains. It's not an act of God. It's a system that we created. We have reinvented it over and over and over again. That's actually what America's really good at, that kind of innovative system shift economically. We did it when we harnessed oil in 1859. We did it during the Industrial Revolution when we innovated mass production. We did it during the space race when we harnessed all of that creativity to totally transform the economy. I think that's where we are again right now.
Thanks. Okay, so a lot of input. I recognize that. I thought it was useful for you to get a little sense of the background, diversity of experience of the group up here. But let's take a few minutes and give you a little bit of time to just reflect on this. We'll open it up in just an open conversation after that. So just about 10 minutes or so. And what's something I heard that was really important to me? What's an issue that really hasn't yet been brought out? I mean, we're quite mindful of this. We talked a lot in preparation of naturally, you can tell the bent personally of all of us is to see what's emerging. And there's a kind of a positiveness to it. But obviously there's a lot more going on in the world than just this. And as Darcy said, in kind of polite terms, Nike is still quite attached to the growth model because it's virtually impossible for an individual company at that size, publicly owned, to disattach from it. So that's an example of a deep issue. So any combination of key insights that you think we should underscore that are important for all of us and deep issues that really could come out. Take a little time and just listen to the field of questions and comments, like what's moving here in the room based upon our little start up here.
I'm personally extremely skeptical of the profit motive as an organizing principle, and what we're witnessing, as my table mate here mentioned, the idea of corporations becoming so powerful that they're actually controlling governments and driving the agenda. So you end up with a world where, although you have a theoretical commitment to democracy, the commons, the community, doesn't really get to have its say because the people with the power and the money who are driven by the psychopathic goal of profit don't care.
Yep. Thank you.
So little bit of this is semantics, but this whole thing started out as how do we internalize externalities? How do we put all our ecological impacts into the market framework? Shouldn't we be rethinking this entirely to say what are our goals for sustainable ecosystems? What are our social goals? And how do we make markets serve those ends instead of squeezing everything into the market framework, market logic, assuming that the ends the market serves are the ones we want to achieve?
I really enjoyed what I hear here. There are a couple of points I'm going to make. First of all, it would be great if we have, you could see the faces of people who are talking. It's like CIA interview.
I'm sorry about that. We couldn't figure out what
Against light.
this silhouetted camera.
Anyway, we come around and get to know you. Now, a lot of interesting things I hear here, and there are things that may make me, I believe in economic aspects of making decisions.
Hold it just a little closer to Mike.
This will make me to believe personally in environmental aspects and really be careful about it. But if I am a CEO, I'm going to look at the bottom line. The problem here is, some of you mentioned here that I agree with, there is a problem with our economic models. The answer is not to leave university people out of it. The answer is bring them in to build newer models. One of the problems here is a lot of people who are making some wrong decisions, as we say. They really believe in environment, they really believe in environmental costs personally, but in terms of the corporation they are working, they are under a different framework to make decisions. So what I would like to suggest here, this is a good environment because we have a lot of people from a lot of disciplines. If people get together to build a new economic model so that when CEO or CFO looks at the bottom line includes all the costs. Not just costs are here, feelings are here, what are you going to do?
Thank you.
My name is Mary Jane Fox, and I'm so appreciative of you as a panel for coming here as practitioners to talk to us. Thank you. My question is around the idea of Nike still being a growth company and Unilever actually not reporting quarterly anymore. The idea being that the economic system, there's institutions that support it, corporations as they are structured being one of them. And I'm wondering what you guys think about the B Corporation, the prospect for B corporations, and how that might be connected to the new type of economy that many of us are hoping for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brian Check with the Center for the Advancement of the Steady State Economy, and you can probably tell the nature of the comment that's coming given that affiliation. You say that there's no chance that Nike is going to be able to get off the growth train, if you will. And I heard the oxymoron of sustainable growth used in a relatively positive fashion, it seemed like, from the panel. But yet, we also seem to get that you guys get that there is a limit to economic growth, and that being the case, a sustainable model would be a steady state economy. Growth not sustainable, degrowth not sustainable, but steady state economy sustainable. So if Nike can't do anything about that or can't get out of the competition of the growth path, then can you guys and people on the Nike boards and in places like that at least try to influence things where pursuit of the steady state economy really is possible and relevant and productive? That would be in macroeconomic policy making, fiscal and monetary and trade policy. And to put the horse before the cart, I mean, you have to have the right goal, right? Growth is not sustainable, and so that's the wrong policy goal, steady state economy being a sustainable goal. So how about you guys helping to raise awareness of limits to growth, even if it's on the side in the the alternative organizations that you're developing, that some of the members of which are still involved in the Nikes and so forth. a simple step toward raising awareness, public and polity awareness of limits to growth and having the appropriate macroeconomic goal, I think would set the rules of the model such that then there could be growth competition within a broader, if you will, salary cap for the broader economy.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your comments and kind of distilling something that I'm feeling in this room and something you generally hear that we probably, I think we have a lot of progressives here and we have a lot of radicals here. And I think that is probably one of the biggest divides in this room. And it's not that we can't get along, be nice to each other, but that's a big divide here. And so thinking about, you've all chosen a certain path. And on the one hand, I think we all can agree that you can get too bogged down in the little details and not make enough change that way because you're just trying to jigger the things that just aren't going to work in the long run. On the other hand, you can be, I have some personal thoughts that, I would share with people, and I sometimes think about those thoughts about policy as not being super relevant because they're just so far from where people are at.
Yeah.
And so sort of thinking about like how you deal with that and how you have come to the conclusion that, it seems like you all feel like you found a sweet spot, that's somewhere in between those two, and sort of how you deal with that, whether you have questions about that, whether you have doubts about that, and yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question about some of the tools coming out of academia that you all are using in your work. Clearly, a lot of how we make all of this applicable is through metrics and indicators, whether it's water footprint or GPI, ecological footprint. And as we move forward, the academic community will continue to improve the data sets and evaluation studies. I wondered if you could each talk a bit about this need for indicators that are both easy to implement and can be applied over time, but also that need to be rigorous and update and improve. And I think there's a balance, and how does that look from your end?
Real simple and straightforward for Darcy. What happens to Nike as a company if you would triple wages, pay health and pension benefits, and improve worker safety in your assembly plants?
Thanks.
Our table registers some pessimism about the possibility of corporations as leading into social change, that they will do this basically to conform to their need to improve bottom line, that is to be out front of other corporations, outside of competitors. Two of us are familiar with your book, Peter. We actually used it in our senior seminar. So we understand that's a perspective, that's a possibility, but the bottom line being this kind of toxic limiting factor. So my colleague here says perhaps a structural change would be to redefine commons, okay? Perhaps legally, it's the kind of thing that could be understood socially. So that certain things are understood as commons, so the externalities that are going to be voided into these commons then can be registered, monitored, taxed. Am I doing okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. One more back here.
Okay, it said that taxation is the power to create or destroy, and I'd like to hear your perspectives on how we can harness the incentives of public finance to drive the things that we want and to disincentivize what we don't want. One of my concerns is as we put a lot of good things in place, it's going to make the land values increase. And the land values are currently privatized and goes to the private landowners, and it drives up faster than return to wages, which makes the housing problem continue as an equitable housing situation. So some of us are working for shifting the tax base off of production and wages and labor and onto the commons rents. I want to know if any of you are on that same page, if you're seeing that importance of tax policy. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so if it's okay, we're just going to take a little pause and let the folks respond. Obviously, a lot of very, very different types of questions. Do you want to start anyone in particular? Anyone?
Say a couple things real quickly. One is this question about how you live, how you balance incremental change where people are with the vision of where we need to go, which I think is one way to frame a bunch of things that have been said. In the end, the profit-seeking corporation that has a single bottom line driven by the financial structure is not a sustainable way of living on this earth. We all know that. It's not a sustainable way. It's not a sustainable institutional structure. It won't work. It'll destroy itself. But now, people live in that system. So the pathway, I guess I challenge you all to not just have a theory of the thing, but have a theory of change. To really challenge yourself to have a theory of change. To really bring practitioners into the mix. And as you develop metrics and contribute indicators, to get into the weeds a little bit of people who need the metrics and indicators, and apply the screen of scientific rigor, but also apply the screen of, is it pragmatically useful in the here and now, which will drive you crazy because it feels like a long way from where we need to go. The here and the now is really frustrating, but we never will change from the here and the now to where we need to go unless we get into the weeds, while also holding the vision of where we need to go. I think maybe that's kind of theoretical, but it's to me like dancing with one foot in one place and another foot in another place. It feels a little awkward sometimes, but I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, I've always termed that as being bicultural. And I don't mean that, in the typical terms, but how do we, as change agents in that, how do we live in the current reality and hold this future possibility and be able to articulate and work with both in that. So a lot of Nike stuff here, and I'll just try and address a couple of things. Somebody said, how do we move to having social goals as a higher goal versus internalizing externalities and things like that, and I may have misunderstood that, but Nike has over the years really embraced this. This is really complex. Nike and these companies are highly matrixed, complex organizations. And so change doesn't happen at a massive level overnight. But just a couple of years ago, they have adopted a mantra, and if you think about just do it and there is no finish line, these have real meaning within Nike. Their new mantra is innovate for a better world. And that cuts across every aspect of the company. And as they become more sophisticated and educated around what this means, they are holding every part of the company, geographically, business unit, functional, accountable to that innovate for a better world. And there really are metrics and goals associated with that. One of the tools, if I can address that, one of the tools that was created over a period of about 8 years, started off as the Sustainability Index. What's that mean when that word really wasn't understood within the corporate context? It's now called the Considered Index. And it's a real-time design tool that teams can use to, based on what they're creating, measure their waste, their use of toxics, environmentally preferred materials, water, and petroleum, and they have an additional metric in there called the change agent. So as they make these design decisions, they come up with a score, and it's gold, silver, bronze. I mean, you have to go with the Olympics. And it's very visible to the entire company. So if you put that in the context of a very competitive environment, you start to drive healthy competition. And the change agent piece was if you came up with a new invention, innovation that moved any one of those metrics in a positive zone, you got extra points, only if you shared it with other teams. And so that starts to address the corporate culture. And that has now since been open sourced through the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. So it's not just Nike, but we put 8 years, actually 11 years of work into it, now open sourced it in the hopes that you can start to really shift the tide. Two other things that have come out of that early mapping and these goals that we set up. One, and the Academy has actually done some work on this, is mapping what it takes to get to zero toxic release in China as a starting point, and that's where the majority of the manufacturing is. And it's a joint brand strategy. It's very, very complex, and the goal is 2020. All those goals were 2020. The other one, to address the manufacturing workforce, contract manufacturing workforce. Nike doesn't own any of those, but taking the same approach and really mapping out what it would take to get to a state of equitable manufacturing, that's now underway as well. So it's not going to flip overnight, but to take a systems approach and to understand where the leverage points and who the partners, what the collaboration has to be, that work is underway. My comment about Nike's never going to get there, I would moderate that and say, and I think I said it, can we get there fast enough? And can we help bring other companies along, either within the industry or beyond that particular industry?
Well, I really appreciate all the substantive comments. I have sort of a potpourri of things I'd like to respond to. First of all, I think there's a really important role for academia in all of this, obviously. In Oregon, we are very intentionally partnering our GPI initiative through Portland State University, in part because we really want to be able to institutionalize it beyond any governor going away. And also, we really need that academic, nonpartisan, credible entity to be doing the number crunching and housing the tool itself. So I think you guys are instrumental. And related to that, another place that everybody needs help in the work on poverty in Oregon. I was in a conversation with a young man. Generational poverty. He was so frustrated, and he said, how can there be unemployment when there is so much work to be done? And that's a profound question. And I think what we really need to be thinking about is how can we create opportunities for livelihoods doing the work that needs to be done. That's everything from carbon sequestration to environmental restoration to taking care of vulnerable populations. And we need good brains noodling through stuff. You know, Einstein said imagination is more than knowledge, or is more important than knowledge. That's kind of where we are. So I think that universities can really help us with that. And I'll give you one super quick example of a case of this actually happening, because I'm so excited about it. Vernonia, Oregon. Tiny little timber town, decimated by the downturn in the timber industry, decimated by a couple of 500-year floods in 7 years, et cetera, there was a study done to look at a number of communities around the country. Why were there long-term timber farming families at pressure of developing, selling out and developing their land to strip malls or whatever? In Vernonia, the single biggest threat was the inability of these families to pay for healthcare costs. Healthcare for the older families and healthcare coverage for the older members of the families and coverage for the younger folks. And so to cut this to just really short, they had several timber families come together, implement sustainable forestry practices. The resulting carbon credits are being sold on the market. The investors that buy those carbon credits know that that money is going into providing health care for these families. That's part of the stipulation. And we are now piloting the A Tree M card, A Tree for Medicine. So that's a card that's just like an ATM card, but it's coded just to pay for healthcare costs. These are the kind of innovative new financing tools that we need to think about. The Cool Schools program in Oregon, we bonded against future energy savings in order to generate revenue for schools to do energy audits and retrofits. That is proving very successful in energy savings as well as job creation and economic stimulus. So we can use your help thinking about how do we pay for the work that society really needs to have done. And then the final, I think the final thing that I'd actually like to charge you with, first of all, quickly, B Corps, yeah, they're part of it. That's part of this area of paradox. That's part of the new curve. And I don't think there's going to be a silver bullet, but we're going to have silver buckshot. We need models like that, testing and showing, some of it's going to work and some of it's not going to work, but I think they're absolutely part of the solution. And the steady state conversation, really important conversation. I know for me personally, especially in the realm of what's politically viable, I I am really thinking through how to redefine growth rather than to throw growth overboard. We do need to reach steady state, I believe, when it comes to materials consumption, no question, but I think we also do need to grow jobs as we head toward 9 or 10 billion people on the planet. So I'm just working on that and would welcome any feedback on that as well.
So I just want to reflect on a couple of themes cutting across several of these questions. Clearly, because of the experience base of the folks up here, there's a lot of experience in the corporate world. Does that mean we think corporations will save the planet? I would say for myself, and I think I speak for all of us, because I know these two really well, that would be truly insane. No way. The Food Lab actually got started with a very simple idea to illustrate. 10 years ago, it became clear to a bunch of us that all the really big issues in the world would require leadership that integrated across the sectors. Sectors being primarily business, civil society, and government. And how do we build networks of leaders that come from all three of those sectors that can actually work together? It's a very, very important long-term aspiration. And Food Lab is one great example that it can be done. I mean, today, literally, there's a board-to-board partnership between Oxfam and Unilever. Do the people in Oxfam like Unilever? No. A lot of them really intensely dislike the giant food corporations. But as one woman who's been there for about 25 years told me not too long ago, she said, I think we too have to go through a paradigm shift. She characterized it this way. She said, there will be no long-term solution to rural poverty that isn't ultimately a commercial solution. That doesn't mean that markets are all that matter. It doesn't mean that we give up kind of valuing the intrinsic qualities of nature and our social well-being. It just means that the marketplace is the marketplace. And it's part of the reality. And guess what? Unilever knows a hell of a lot more about commercial innovation than Oxfam. Just like Oxfam knows a hell of a lot more about the plight of the rural poor and organizing strategies and mobilizing strategies. So just to illustrate, the knowledge that's needed has to come from everywhere. This is an all-hands-on-deck time. I do think something that hasn't been said that I wanted to kind of underscore as a theme that really we should talk about more, because it pops up in so many implicit ways. The theme of this session is about scale. One key to change at scale is changing the rules of the game. It is truly illogical, I would say insane, that we tell corporations that your number one stakeholder is the shareholder. In a world with, in all kinds of ways, a surplus of financial capital. Why do you optimize the input that you have the most abundance of? And great shortage and great social needs for employment. That's a change in the rules of the game. There's actually a movement going on in England right now called Dataless. You can Google Dataless and you will find a very interesting movement led by a member of the House of Lords, former Minister of Trade, that they really need to start to redefine corporate law. By the way, a lot of this is not actually in any law statements, it's precedent. If you ask why are corporations treated as individuals, why do they have to maximize the shareholder as the number one stakeholder? It's nowhere in the law, but it is absolutely legal precedent, such that every board today feels that's their legal responsibility. That's a change in the rules of the game. As Hal said, it's crazy to think that companies driven by profit, and for all intents and purposes, practically, with a few exceptions, short-term profit, can exercise much leadership, is just nuts. It won't happen. The organizations that are operating with some latitude of innovation within the current rules of the game are basically ones that are prepared to say, we have a long-term strategy and we're focused on long-term profit. Fine. That starts to move you in the right direction, but still leaves a lot of things unmeasured and unmeasurable and unaccounted for. The progress indicator, growing beyond GDP is another perfect example. That's a change in the rules of the game. I mean, I don't care if you're the president of China or the president of the United States. You shake in your boots if your economy doesn't generate the GDP that the people expect. It is the absolute norm in national leadership worldwide today. That's a change in the rules of the game. If a few big countries start to get serious, and I think Sylvia's right, that it probably starts at the state level in many places like the US, really get serious showing the benefits that can come from genuine progress, as opposed to something that no one even knows how to define. Probably in this room there's at least 10, but rarely is there more than 1 or 2% of any group that can tell you how GDP is measured. And yet we worship it like it's, came from, the 10 Commandments. It's really bizarre. So changes in the rules of the game are really important. I think academics, I agree with Cylvia, could really help a lot in this. Pick any one of these. How would you mobilize enough people to do the right kinds of analyses, the right kinds of positive cases, as well as critical analyses, to show that GDP is really crazy? Or that privileging over all other stakeholders, the investor who has the least emotional connection, and as I said, really represents the most abundant resource as the one and only thing that a board of directors has to be accountable to, ultimately. The couple other things that I think are important, and I just want to, this has been said, but I'm just going to say it in slightly different words. You work in the system, you work on the system. I mean, there's different ways to say it, the progressives versus radicals. I think you probably touched a chord for a lot of us when you brought that up, and I really appreciate the personal way in which you brought it up. It's kind of a personal dilemma for every one of us. Does the system suck? Absolutely. Does the system need to be changed? Without question. Then it's a question of, well, what can I do? Where's my part in this? And every one of us have gone through some sort of personal journey of trying to sort out, right here, right now, how can my personal resources be best used? And that could be writing the radical tracks. It really could be. If it's done really well and it hits on a compelling note, we need a Mothers Against Drunk Driving on campaign finance reform in this country. If you really want to talk about America, we need a ground-up movement to say, hey, our national government, and it was said by somebody, I couldn't agree more, lives in the hip pocket of a relatively small number of large economic interests, period. Doesn't matter who's elected. It's not the fault of the individuals, it's a fundamental problem in the system right now. So I think we all kind of look for where's our part, and holding both. That, to write the ultimate critique that has no impact is probably not really needed, but to do lots of incremental things that have no long-term vision is not really needed either. Here's a low-hanging fruit, in my opinion. Now, I know it's not really a low-hanging fruit, but I'm just going to use this to illustrate. I don't think it would take long to build a consensus that one of the critical systems that needs to shift in this country is our energy system. It's the key to so many things. It's not in this country. Believe me, it's the linchpin for China. If you look at China, one of the reasons they're doing everything in the world, they're world leader in every aspect of alternative energy, generation and storage, because they know it's the linchpin for their patterns of development, as well as their greenhouse gas global footprint. Why do we not have any consensus of what our energy system should look like in 50 years? How can we possibly imagine steering our way through all the complexities, which are both short-term, long-term, and regional, because your energy system, if it's really going to be a system that's based on first principles of living systems, is going to be different. If you're in the equatorial belt, or you're in a very northern latitude, that's kind of obvious. But there ought to be a way to kind of work steadily to build a consensus. It's probably a regional consensus, my guess on this one. I think it'd be difficult to do it at a national level, except in pretty abstract terms. But if we really work to build that consensus, then you could use that as a test point. How does this or that decision move you in the direction of where you want to be in 50 years? Who's really working seriously on that? As a collaborative effort to bring together the right voices. I'm just using this to illustrate. I think there's a variety of, I want to call them low-hanging fruit. It's kind of a distortion of the metaphor. But all I'm saying is, this is not complicated. It's not impossible to conceive of that. And without it, we are literally blind. That would obviously dovetail with all kinds of progress indicators, because your energy system touches so many aspects, from employment to water to obviously climate change. But we have no serious process of building a national or even regional consensus. What would it look like? And then how would we use that 50-year vision to calibrate and make judgments in the next 5, 10, 20, 25 years with the investment cycles you deal with in energy all the time. So, glad we touched on B Corps. Just looking at my notes here, if there's any other big one we missed entirely. Well, I was really glad when you said it because Cylvia told me at the break, we really need new economic models. And to come back to what probably is the most important theme for this group, what's the role of academia? Articulating new economic models clearly. But in fact, there's a lot that's been written on this. I would say showing how they can work. Doing the case studies and the analysis of the difficulties of implementation of particular alternative economic models. Again, my bias is probably more at a regional level, because I think, like the energy system, they're going to be quite varied, depending upon what part of the world you're in. So, in any event, hopefully this leaves you all with plenty that you can see is your part of the job, because it's a big part.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and engaging in a very interesting comparing notes and getting feedback, and also courage to come to this audience who is so diverse and at the same time posing such very fundamental questions and presenting your piece of where you actually work in the world. So thank you so much.